I never imagined my own mother would rewrite my grandmother's will behind my back and use my grandmother's own trembling hand to do it while she was too sick to know what she was signing. I found out 3 weeks after the funeral, sitting in a lawyer's office that smelled like burnt coffee and old paper, watching my mother smile at me like she hadn't just taken everything I was supposed to inherit. "You were never the favorite, Emily," she said. Like she was reminding me of something obvious, something I should have already accepted. "Grandma just felt sorry for you. I want to tell you what happened next. But first, you need to understand how we got here, because none of this makes sense without the years that came before it. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life, I believed my family was just complicated, not broken, not cruel, complicated. That's the word I used to explain away everything for years to myself and to anyone who asked why I flinched when my mother raised her voice, why I apologized for things that weren't my fault, why I always sat a little too straight at Thanksgiving dinner, waiting for the moment the air in the room would change. My mother, Diane, was the kind of woman people described as put together. She wore blazers to grocery stores. She corrected waiters on the pronunciation of menu items. She had opinions about fonts, about thank you cards, about the correct way to load a dishwasher. She ran her household the way some people run corporations, with performance reviews nobody asked for and standards that shifted depending on who she was measuring. And she had 2 daughters, me and my younger sister, Kayla. Kayla was the golden child. I don't say that bitterly, or at least I try not to. It's just a fact, the way some facts are just facts, like the sky being blue or water being wet. Kayla got the good bedroom growing up, the one with the bay window that caught the morning light. Kayla got piano lessons, then art lessons when she got bored of piano, then horseback riding lessons when she got bored of art. When I wanted to quit soccer at 11 because the coach made me cry in front of the whole team, my mother sat me down and told me that quitting wasn't in our family's vocabulary. I finished the season. I hated every practice. 2 years later, Kayla quit gymnastics after one bad meet, and nobody said a word about wasted money or broken commitments. I used to wonder what made her love Kayla more openly. I stopped wondering around age 19, when I overheard my mother on the phone with her sister, laughing about how I was the responsible one. Thank God, because Kayla sure isn't responsible. That was my role. Not loved, responsible. There's a difference, and it took me half my life to understand it. I became the one who remembered birthdays, who drove mom to her dentist appointments when her car was in the shop, who picked up the slack when Kayla forgot to pay her share of the family group gift. Again, I became fluent in the language of making myself smaller so there'd be more room for everyone else. I got good grades because good grades didn't invite conflict. I got a stable job in logistics because stable jobs didn't invite conflict either. I built a whole life, brick by brick, out of not wanting to be a problem. The one person who really saw me, was my grandmother, Rose. Grandma Rose lived 2 streets over from us my entire childhood, in a small brick house with a garden that smelled like tomatoes and rosemary every summer. She was my mother's mother, though you'd never guess it from how different they were. Where my mother was sharp edges and quiet judgment, Grandma Rose was soft laughter and second helpings. A woman who kept a tin of butterscotch candy by the door for the mail carrier and remembered the names of every stray cat in the neighborhood. I spent every Sunday with her for almost 15 years. It started when I was 9, walking over after church while my mother and Kayla went shopping, and it never really stopped. Grandma Rose taught me to bake bread on those Sundays, showed me how to feel when the dough was ready by pressing 2 fingers into it, how to tell if the yeast was still alive by the way it foamed in warm water. She taught me to can tomatoes in August, to deadhead roses in June, to sit quietly with my own thoughts instead of running from them. More than any of that, she taught me what it felt like to be chosen. Not because I'd earned it, not because I was useful, just because I existed. I remember one Sunday, I must have been about 15, sitting on her porch swing, crying about something my mother had said. I don't even remember what anymore. Some small cruelty dressed up as concern, the kind my mother specialized in. Grandma Rose didn't tell me to toughen up. She didn't tell me my mother didn't mean it. She just put her arm around me and said, "You are not responsible, Emily. You are loved. Someone just forgot to tell you." Then she got up, made tea, and let me sit in her kitchen until I felt like a person again. That sentence became something I carried with me for the rest of my life. Through college, through a marriage that started with hope and ended in quiet devastation, through every family dinner where I felt like a guest in my own life. You are loved. Someone just forgot to tell you. Even after I moved 2 hours away for work in my late 20s, even after I got engaged, even after the divorce that came 18 months later and left me hollowed out and ashamed of things that weren't my fault. I drove back every single Sunday to see her. 2 hours there, 2 hours back every week for years. Grandma Rose never once made me explain myself when I showed up looking tired or thin or like I hadn't slept. She just made tea and let the silence do the healing. Kayla visited twice a year, usually around holidays, usually with her hand out. I don't mean that as an exaggeration. I mean it literally. Kayla would show up with some story about a car repair or a temporary cash flow issue from whatever business venture she was chasing that season. And Grandma Rose, sweet as she was, would quietly slip her a check before she left. I never said anything about it. It wasn't my place, and honestly, it wasn't about the money. It just confirmed something I already knew, that in our family, love and money moved in the same direction, and that direction was rarely toward me. I tell you all this not to make myself sound like a saint. I'm not. I have flaws, plenty of them. I can be stubborn to a fault. I hold grudges longer than I should, replaying old arguments in the shower years after they happened. I have a hard time asking for help, even when I desperately need it, because some part of me still believes that needing things makes me a burden. But I loved my grandmother the way you love someone who saved you, quietly and completely. And I never once thought about what she might leave me when she died. That thought genuinely never crossed my mind. Not once, until the day everything fell apart. Grandma Rose got sick in March. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4 by the time they found it, which the doctors said explained why she'd seemed so tired the last few months, why she'd stopped gardening even as the weather turned warm, why she'd started forgetting small things. A name here, a date there, the second half of a sentence she'd started with perfect confidence. I took a leave of absence from work the week we got that diagnosis. I didn't think twice about it. I moved into her guest room, the same room I used to nap in as a kid, still decorated with the same faded wallpaper, and I became her full-time caretaker. I fed her, bathed her when she could no longer manage on her own, held the little plastic cup of pills to her lips every morning at 8 and every night at 8, because that was the schedule the hospice nurse gave us, and I followed it like scripture. I learned to change dressings. I learned the particular exhaustion of sleeping with one ear open, always listening for her voice down the hall. My mother visited on weekends, usually for an hour or two, usually dressed like she had somewhere more important to be afterward. Kayla visited twice, total, in 4 months. Once in April, for a birthday. Once in June, for reasons I later learned were not what she claimed. I don't say that to score points. I say it because it matters for what came later. In June, near the end, Grandma Rose had what the doctors called clear days, moments where the fog of medication and illness lifted just enough for her to be fully herself again, sharp-eyed and present, like the cancer had briefly loosened its grip. On one of those clear days, she held my hand tightly, tighter than I expected from someone so frail, and told me she'd taken care of things. "You don't have to worry, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady, in a way it hadn't been in weeks. "I've made sure you're looked after. You and only you. I know what your mother did to you all those years. I know how she made you feel like you had to earn a seat at your own table. This is me telling you, one last time, so you never forget it. You were always enough." I thought she meant emotionally. I thought she was giving me permission to finally believe I was loved, one last gift before she left me. I didn't think, I never once thought, she was talking about her will. She died on a Tuesday morning in July, with my hand in hers and sunlight coming through the window the way it always did in that house, dust drifting lazily through the light like nothing was wrong at all. The funeral was small, mostly neighbors and a few cousins I hadn't seen in years. My mother cried beautifully, the way she did everything, composed even in grief, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that never seemed to smudge her mascara. Kayla flew in the night before and left the day after, citing a work obligation nobody bothered to question. I stood at the graveside, feeling like someone had scooped out my insides and left me standing upright out of habit alone, going through the motions of a person who was still whole. 3 weeks later, my mother called and asked me to meet her at a law office downtown. "Just a formality," she said, her voice light, almost cheerful, "about Mom's estate. Won't take long." I remember what I wore that day, a gray dress, because I still hadn't stopped wearing funeral colors, hadn't been able to bring myself to reach for anything brighter. I remember the lawyer's name, Mr. Holloway, an older man with kind, tired eyes who kept glancing at me like he felt sorry for something he hadn't said yet, like he already knew this meeting was going to break something in me, and there was nothing he could do about it. My mother sat across from me, Kayla beside her, both of them oddly calm, oddly rehearsed, like actors who'd already read the script and knew exactly how the scene would end. Mr. Holloway cleared his throat and slid a document across the table. "This is the most recent will on file," he said carefully. "Executed in May of this year. May, 2 months before Grandma Rose died. 2 months after she'd told me, with total clarity in her eyes, that she'd taken care of things." I read the document twice before the words made sense. The house, the savings, the jewelry, all of it, split between my mother and Kayla. My name wasn't in it, not once. Not even a mention. Not even a token gesture. Not even the recipe box I'd asked for as a joke once, and Grandma had promised me with a wink. I looked up, and that's when my mother said it. That's when she smiled that small, satisfied smile and told me I was never the favorite. That Grandma had just felt sorry for me. That it was time I accepted the truth about my place in this family. I sat there in that leather chair, in that gray funeral dress, feeling something inside me go very, very quiet, because I remembered May. I remembered it clearly. Remembered it in my body the way you remember trauma. In May, Grandma Rose had been having one of her worst weeks. Confused, exhausted, sometimes not recognizing me until I spoke, sometimes calling me by my mother's name. In May, she couldn't have signed her own name without help. I had watched her struggle to hold a spoon that month. And somebody had helped her. I didn't say anything in that office. I just nodded, thanked Mr. Holloway in a voice that didn't sound like mine, and walked out into the parking lot, where I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could make my hands stop shaking enough to drive. But that night, going through a box of Grandma's things she'd asked me to keep safe months earlier, a box my mother didn't know existed, tucked in the back of my closet since April, I found an envelope inside an old recipe tin. My name was written across the front in Grandma Rose's careful, looping handwriting, the ink slightly faded, like she'd written it in one of her clearer moments and hidden it away for exactly this day. I hadn't even opened it yet. I was still holding it, staring at my name in her handwriting, feeling my pulse in my throat, when my phone rang. It was my mother. "Emily," she said, her voice tight in a way I hadn't heard before, a crack running under all that composure. "Have you been in your grandmother's house? Mr. Holloway just called me. He said, there's a problem with the May will." I looked down at the envelope in my hand and said nothing at all. My mother's voice was still waiting on the other end of the line, sharper now, impatient with my silence. "Emily, are you there? I asked you a question." I set the envelope down on the guest bed like it might combust if I moved too fast. "I haven't opened anything," I said, which was true, technically, in that exact moment. "Why? What kind of problem?" There was a pause, the kind of pause my mother used when she was deciding how much of the truth to give someone. I'd heard that pause my whole life. "Mr. Holloway says there might be an issue with witnessing signatures. It's probably nothing. Just paperwork." Her voice smoothed itself back into that professional calm she wore like a second skin. "I'll handle it. You don't need to worry about any of this, sweetheart. Just focus on grieving. Focus on grieving." As if grief were a task I could schedule, a box I could check off while she quietly rearranged the last month of my grandmother's life behind my back. I hung up without agreeing to anything and sat on the edge of that bed for a long time, the envelope beside me, before I finally picked it up again. My hands weren't steady. I slid my thumb under the flap, and inside was a single folded sheet of stationery. The pale, yellow kind Grandpa Rose always kept in her writing desk, and a smaller, sealed envelope tucked behind it, labeled in different, shakier handwriting, for Mr. Holloway only, not to be opened by anyone else. I read the letter first. "My dearest Emily," it began, and I had to stop and breathe before I could keep going. Because, just as her handwriting undid something in my chest that I'd been holding together with sheer stubbornness since the funeral. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you everything I wanted to. Or it means something happened that I was afraid might happen. I want you to know that in April, when I could still think clearly, I went to see Mr. Holloway on my own, without your mother knowing. I updated my will then. I know your mother. I know how she gets when she feels like something is slipping out of her control. And I was afraid, forgive an old woman for being afraid, that she might try something once I got sicker and couldn't advocate for myself. So I made a second copy of everything, notarized, dated, witnessed by people who have nothing to do with our family and nothing to gain from lying for me. I gave it to Mr. Holloway to hold separately, outside the regular file, with instructions to release it only if a later will surface that he had reason to doubt. I trust him. I've trusted him for 30 years, since before you were born. I am not a foolish woman, Emily, whatever your mother may think of me. I saw what she did to you your whole life, the small ways she carved pieces off of you and called it discipline. I saw how she used Kayla's needs to excuse never once asking about yours. I watched you become someone who apologizes for taking up space, and it broke something in me every single time. You were never the one who had to be responsible for this family. You were simply the only one who chose to be kind about it. Whatever happens with the will your mother shows you, know this, it is not the truth. The truth is with Mr. Holloway, sealed, waiting. Go to him, tell him May, he'll understand. I love you more than I ever found the right words for. I hope this letter finally is them. Grandma rose. I don't know how long I sat there after I finished reading. Long enough that the light outside the window shifted from gold to gray. I read it 4 more times, until I had it memorized, until her voice was in my head instead of just on the page. I didn't realize that was only the beginning of what I'd have to fight for. I called Mr. Holloway's office first thing the next morning, my voice steadier than I felt. His assistant said he had a cancellation and could see me at 11. I didn't tell my mother I was going. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel obligated to tell her anything at all. His office looked different without my mother and Kayla sitting beside me, performing grief and patience for an audience. Just me, across the desk from him, the sealed envelope from the recipe tin in my lap. I found something, I said, and slid it across to him. Grandma left it for me, she said to tell you May. Something shifted in his face the moment I said it. Recognition, and something that looked almost like relief. He turned the envelope over in his hands, studying the seal, then looked up at me with those tired, kind eyes. Your grandmother came to see me in April, he said slowly, like he was choosing each word with care. Alone. Lucid, sharp as a tack, more clear-headed than most clients I see on a good day. She revised her will completely. Left specific notarized instructions that if any later document surfaced naming different beneficiaries, I was to compare signatures, verify witnesses, and if anything seemed irregular, produce the April will instead. My chest felt tight, so the May will. I flagged it the moment it came across my desk, he admitted. The witnesses listed were a home health aide who no longer works in this state, and someone I couldn't locate any record of at all. And your grandmother's signature, he paused, pulling both documents from a folder and laying them side by side. Look at this yourself. I leaned forward. The April signature was shaky but recognizable, the same looping R she'd signed birthday cards with my entire life. The May signature was different, straighter, more controlled, like someone had guided her hand, or like someone had practiced copying it. I didn't say anything to your mother yet, he continued. I wanted to see if the true will would surface on its own first, the way your grandmother instructed. And here you are. I didn't cry in that office, though I wanted to. I felt something colder than grief settle into me instead. Clarity, maybe, or the particular calm that comes right before you decide to stop being afraid of someone. What happens now? I asked. Now, he said, I file a formal notice contesting the May will, submit the April will as the valid document, and request a forensic handwriting analysis on both signatures. Given what you've described about your grandmother's medical state in May, and given this letter, I think a judge will take this very seriously. But Emily, he leaned forward slightly. Your mother is not going to take this well. I want you prepared for that. I thought I was prepared. I had no idea. The call came from Kayla 2 days later, not my mother, which should have told me something. Kayla never called me directly unless she needed something, or wanted to relay a message she didn't have the nerve to deliver herself. What did you do? She said. No hello, no pretense. Mom got a letter from some attorney about contesting the will. She's losing it, Emily. Seriously losing it. I didn't do anything except tell the truth, I said. Grandma left instructions. I followed them. You're going to tear this family apart over money, Kayla said, and I actually laughed. A short, humorless sound that surprised even me. This isn't about money, I said. This is about someone forging our dying grandmother's signature. If you don't think that matters, that says a lot more about you than it does about me. There was a long silence. I didn't know anything about a forgery, Kayla said finally, quieter now. I swear, Emily, Mom just told me Grandma changed her mind in the end. That she wanted things split between us because I needed it more. I believed her, actually. Kayla was many things. Careless, self-absorbed, quick to take what was handed to her without asking too many questions. But she wasn't a planner. She wasn't the one who would have sat in a room coaching a dying woman's hand across a page. That kind of calculated cruelty had only ever belonged to one person in our family. Ask Mom where she was every day in May, I said. Ask her who the witnesses on that will actually are, then decide whether you still want to defend her. I hung up before she could answer, and for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel guilty about it. My mother called that night, and I let it go to voicemail. She called again an hour later. and again the next morning. I didn't answer any of them, not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't trust myself to speak to her yet without saying something I couldn't take back. Or worse, without folding the way I always had, apologizing my way out of a fight I hadn't even started. On the fourth day, she showed up at my apartment. I opened the door and she was standing there in one of her tailored coats, makeup perfect, eyes red-rimmed, in a way that might have been real or might have been strategic. I genuinely couldn't tell anymore, and that uncertainty itself felt like its own small grief. "You have no idea what you're doing," she said, pushing past me into my living room without waiting for an invitation, the way she always had, in every house I'd ever lived in. "Do you understand what a legal battle like this does to a family? To Kayla's engagement? To my reputation at the firm? People will hear about this, Emily. People will talk." "People should talk," I said. "Someone forged Grandma's signature while she was dying, Mom. Do you have any idea what that actually is? It's not a family disagreement. It's a crime." Her face did something I'd never seen it do before. A flicker of fear underneath all that composure, gone almost as fast as it appeared, replaced by something colder. "You don't know what you're accusing me of," she said, low and even. "Be very careful, Emily." "I know exactly what I'm accusing you of," I said, and for once in my life, my voice didn't shake. "And I think you know it too. That's why you're here instead of your lawyer." She stared at me for a long moment, something calculating behind her eyes, like she was recalculating an equation she thought she'd already solved. Then she said the thing that would replay in my head for weeks afterward, the thing that told me exactly how far she was willing to go to keep what she'd taken. "If this goes to court," she said quietly, "I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of unstable, vindictive daughter I raised. I have documentation, Emily, doctor's notes, things from your divorce. I will use every single piece of it if I have to." I felt something in me go still, the way the air goes still right before a storm breaks. Whatever fear I'd been carrying about fighting her, about finally standing up after 34 years of making myself smaller, it evaporated in that moment, replaced by something harder, something that didn't flinch. "Then I guess we'll see each other in court," I said, and opened the front door for her to leave. She didn't move for a long moment. When she finally did, she paused in the doorway and looked back at me. And for just a second, just one flickering second, I saw something underneath the anger that looked almost like fear. "You have no idea what you're about to uncover," she said. Then she left, and I stood there in my quiet apartment, staring at the closed door, with the sinking realization that this was so much bigger than a stolen will. Her words sat with me for 3 days before I understood what she meant. "You have no idea what you're about to uncover." I turned that sentence over so many times it stopped sounding like English, the way a word does when you repeat it too many times in a row. Was it a threat? A warning? Something closer to a confession dressed up as a threat. The kind of thing people say when they're more scared than they're letting on. I called Mr. Holloway the next morning and told him what she'd said. He was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his voice had a different weight to it, careful in a new way. "Emily," he said, "I think it's time I told you something I probably should have mentioned already. Your grandmother didn't just update her will in April. She also asked me to open a separate file, a private one related to some financial concerns she had. I didn't think it was relevant to the will contest, but given what your mother said to you, I think it might be time we looked at it together." "What kind of financial concerns?" "She wanted a forensic accountant to review the finances of a small trust she'd set up years ago. The one that held funds for both you and Kayla meant to be released at 35. She'd noticed discrepancies, withdrawals she didn't authorize." I sat down hard on my kitchen stool, the phone pressed so tightly to my ear it started to ache. "What kind of withdrawals?" "I'd rather not speculate until we have the report. But Emily, she asked me to keep this quiet until she was gone, in case she was wrong. She didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. The report came back to my office 2 weeks ago. I hadn't opened it yet because, frankly, I've been consumed with the will contest. I think it's time we opened it." I asked him to email it to me. He said he'd rather I come in person. I understood why the moment I sat across from him an hour later and watched him slide a thick folder across the desk, the way he had with the wills. Except this time his expression wasn't careful sympathy. It was something closer to controlled anger, like even he, a man who had probably seen every ugly version of family greed in 30 years of estate law, was disturbed by what was inside. The trust, it turned out, had been established by my grandfather before he died, funded further by Grandma Rose over the years, meant to give both me and Kayla a financial foundation when we turned 35, 2 years away for me, 4 for Kayla. It had been sitting untouched, growing quietly, for over a decade, except it hadn't been untouched. Over the last 6 years, a series of withdrawals had been made, each one just under the threshold that would have triggered an automatic notification to Grandma Rose as trust grantor. Small enough to avoid detection individually, large enough, cumulatively, to have drained nearly $200,000 from an account meant to secure my future and my sister's. The signature authorizing each withdrawal wasn't Grandma Rose's. It wasn't mine. It was my mother's, using a power of attorney she'd apparently had drawn up years earlier. One Grandma Rose swore, in a note attached to the forensic report, she never remembered signing. I stared at the pages until the numbers blurred, until they stopped being numbers and became something else entirely. Years of my mother telling me money was tight when I asked for help with textbooks in college. Years of her sighing about how expensive things were whenever I mentioned wanting to go back to school. Years of watching her buy a new car, renovate her kitchen, take trips to places she'd always dreamed of, all while telling Kayla and me that our grandparents' money wasn't really ours to count on. She's been stealing from us for 6 years, I said, and my voice came out flat, disbelieving, like I was reading someone else's life out loud. It appears that way, Mr. Holloway said gently. I want to be clear, Emily, this isn't just a civil matter anymore. Forging a power of attorney, unauthorized withdrawal from a trust, elder fund, financial exploitation. These are criminal charges. I have an obligation to report this, both to the court overseeing the will contest and, given the amounts involved, potentially to the district attorney's office. I thought about my mother's face in my apartment doorway. You have no idea what you're about to uncover. She hadn't been threatening to expose some secret about me. She'd been panicking, trying to scare me away from digging any further, because she knew exactly what was buried underneath the will contest, waiting to surface the moment anyone looked closely enough. I called Kayla that night. I almost didn't. Some old, worn-down part of me still wanted to protect her from the fallout, the way I always had, the responsible one cleaning up messes that weren't mine to clean. But this affected her too, more than she knew, and she deserved to hear it from me before she heard it from a courtroom. She didn't believe me at first. That doesn't make sense, she kept saying. Why would Mom do that? She has money. She doesn't need to steal from a trust. I don't think it was ever about needing it, I said. I think it was about control. About making sure we stayed dependent on her instead of having our own foundation. Think about it, Kayla. Every time you needed money, who did you go to? Mom. Not the trust you didn't even know existed. Mom, who always came through, who always reminded you afterward how much you owed her. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. When Kayla finally spoke, her voice had lost all its usual breeziness. She told me last year that trust barely had anything left in it, that Grandpa's investments hadn't panned out the way everyone hoped. A pause. I never questioned it. Why would I question it? Because that's what she counts on, I said. That neither of us would ever question her. I didn't realize that was only the beginning of what Kayla would have to reckon with about our mother, and I didn't push her further that night. I could hear something breaking quietly in her voice, the sound of a lifetime of assumptions collapsing all at once, and even after everything, I didn't have the heart to make it worse. I just told her I loved her, and that whatever she decided to do next, I wasn't going to make her choose between us. She'd have to make that choice herself. The forensic report went to the court the following week, attached as supplementary evidence to the will contest. Mr. Holloway warned me it would likely accelerate everything. That once a judge saw evidence of financial exploitation alongside a contested will with suspicious signatures, the case would move faster and harder than a typical estate dispute. He was right. Within 10 days, my mother's attorney reached out requesting an emergency mediation session, clearly hoping to negotiate some kind of settlement before things went further. I almost said no. Some furious, exhausted part of me wanted to drag this all the way to trial, wanted a judge and a jury and a public record of everything she'd done. But Mr. Holloway advised me to at least hear what she offered, if only to see how much she understood about the position she was in. The mediation was held in a sterile conference room, 3 floors below his office, my mother and her attorney on one side of a long table, Mr. Holloway and I on the other. Kayla sat beside me, which surprised me more than almost anything else that had happened so far. She hadn't said much to our mother in the 2 weeks since our phone call, and the tension between them was so thick I could feel it pressing against my skin the moment we all sat down. My mother looked different than she had in my apartment doorway. Smaller, somehow, despite the same tailored coat, the same careful makeup. Like the armor didn't quite fit the same way anymore. I'm prepared to void the May will, her attorney began, and revert to the terms of the April will in full, provided Emily agrees not to pursue criminal charges related to the trust withdrawals, and both daughters agree to keep the matter of the estate private, with no public filings beyond what's legally necessary. I looked at my mother while her attorney spoke. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the table, at her own hands folded in front of her, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw something in her that looked like shame. Not enough shame to have stopped what she'd done, but enough, apparently, to keep her from meeting my eyes while someone else negotiated her way out of the consequences. No, I said, before Mr. Holloway could even respond. Everyone looked at me. My mother's head came up sharply. I'm not agreeing to bury this, I continued, my voice steadier than I expected it to be, steadier than it had ever been in a room with her. You forged a dying woman's signature. You stole from a trust meant for your own children for 6 years. I'm not protecting you from that, just to make this easier for you. Emily, my mother started, her voice cracking in a way I'd genuinely never heard before. Not performance, not composure, something raw underneath it. I wish I had paid attention to it sooner, I said quietly, more to myself than to her, thinking of every Christmas, every birthday, every moment she'd looked at me like I was a disappointment for needing anything at all. I spent my whole life thinking I had to earn a place in this family, and the whole time, you were the one taking things that were never yours to take. Her attorney tried to interject, tried to steer the conversation back towards settlement terms. But I was already standing, already gathering my coat, already done sitting across a table from a woman who'd spent 34 years making me feel like too much and not enough at the same time. See you in court, I said. I didn't look back to see her face. I didn't need to. I could feel Kayla rising beside me, following me out of that room. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something that wasn't grief or anger or exhaustion. I felt like I was finally standing exactly where I belonged. The courtroom wasn't anything like I'd imagined. No dramatic gallery, no hushed spectators, just a modest probate courtroom with fluorescent lighting and a judge named Patricia Renfrew who had the tired, unimpressed expression of someone who had seen every version of family greed the world had to offer and was rarely surprised anymore. I sat beside Mr. Holloway at one table. My mother sat with her attorney at the other, close enough that I could see her hands trembling slightly around a pen she wasn't using. Kayla sat behind me, in the row reserved for family, which felt strange and right at the same time. My sister, choosing a side for maybe the first time in her adult life, and choosing mine. The proceedings took 2 days. I hadn't expected that. I'd imagined something faster, something that would resolve in an afternoon and let me go back to feeling numb in private instead of exposed in public. Instead, I sat through hours of testimony, forensic handwriting experts explaining pressure points in letter formation, financial analysts walking the judge through 6 years of trust withdrawals with the kind of dry precision that somehow made the betrayal feel even more real, more calculated, more impossible to explain away as a misunderstanding. My mother's attorney tried everything. He argued the May will represented Grandma Rose's true final wishes, that she'd simply changed her mind after reconciling with my mother in her final months. He argued the trust withdrawals were loans, verbally authorized, never formalized because family doesn't need formal paperwork. He argued I was a bitter, financially motivated daughter using my grandmother's death as an opportunity for a payday. I didn't flinch through any of it. I'd spent too many years flinching. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and let the evidence speak instead of my emotions. Because Mr. Holloway had told me something true before we walked in. The facts don't need you to defend them. They just need you to let them be seen. The handwriting expert was the first real turning point, she testified, with slides projected onto a screen at the front of the courtroom, that the May signature showed clear indicators of guided hand movement, pressure inconsistencies that suggested a second hand controlling the pen, letter formations that didn't match the natural, if shaky, patterns present in dozens of other documents my grandmother had signed independently that same month. The April signature, by contrast, matched her established patterns exactly, consistent with a woman signing of her own will, in her own hand, with full cognition. Then came the witnesses listed on the May document. 1. The home health aide had in fact moved out of state in February, 3 months before she supposedly witnessed a signing in our living room. She testified via video call, confused and a little frightened, explained that she'd never signed any documents for my grandmother in May because she hadn't been in the state at all. The second witness didn't exist. No such person could be located in any public record, any database, any registry. My mother's attorney tried to argue clerical error. The judge did not look convinced. But it was the trust testimony that changed the air in the room. My mother took the stand on the second day, and I watched her walk to the witness box in a navy dress I'd never seen before. Something chosen, I assumed, to read as humble rather than sharp. She answered the early questions carefully, deliberately, sticking close to prepared language about family loans and verbal agreements and misunderstandings between a mother and daughter who loved each other deeply. Then the prosecutor, because it had become that, a criminal matter running parallel to the civil contest, once the DA's office reviewed the forensic report, asked her a simple question. Mrs. Carter, can you explain why 6 withdrawals, each one, were made in amounts specifically calibrated to fall just under the threshold that would have triggered an automatic notification to your mother as trust grantor? My mother opened her mouth. Nothing came out for a long moment. I watched something in her face crack, not dramatically, not the way it would in a movie, but quietly, the way ice cracks under weight it was never built to hold. I didn't want to worry her, she finally said. She was getting older. I thought it would be easier. Easier for whom? The prosecutor asked. She didn't answer that one. I thought I would feel triumphant watching her fall apart on that stand. I didn't. I felt something closer to grief, a strange, unexpected grief for the mother I'd always wished I had, the one I kept hoping might still exist somewhere underneath all the sharp edges, the one who might someday look at me and simply say, I'm proud of you, without conditions attached. Watching her unravel in that courtroom, I understood with total finality that version of her had never existed. I wasn't losing anything I'd actually had. I was just finally admitting what I'd never had at all. The judge's ruling came on a gray Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the hearing ended. Mr. Holloway called me before I even made it to the courthouse to hear it read aloud, his voice carrying something I hadn't heard from him before, satisfaction, maybe, or relief on my behalf. Judge Renfrew ruled the May will invalid, citing clear evidence of undue influence, fraudulent witnessing, and a signature inconsistent with valid execution. The April will was reinstated in full, naming me as primary beneficiary of the house, the majority of the savings, and specific personal items, including, I found out later, reading the actual document for the first time, the recipe tin itself, along with a note in Mr. Holloway's file that Grandma Rose had specifically requested it be mentioned by name, so I would understand it wasn't an oversight. On the trust matter, the judge ordered my mother to repay the full amount withdrawn, with interest, and referred the case formally to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution related to the forged power of attorney and elder financial exploitation. I sat in the gallery when that part was read, and I watched my mother's face go pale in a way makeup couldn't fix, watched her attorney lean over and murmur something urgent in her ear, watched Kayla beside me exhale a breath she must have been holding for weeks. I didn't feel joy. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect a story like this to end with fireworks, with a clean, satisfying burst of vindication. What I felt instead was quieter. Stia dear, like something that had been twisted too tight for 34 years, had finally been allowed to loosen, one careful turn at a time. My mother pled guilty 3 months later to a reduced charge, avoiding a trial in exchange for a sentence that included probation, mandatory restitution, and a public record that would follow her for the rest of her life. She didn't call me after the sentencing. I didn't expect her to. Some part of me still waited, though, in the quiet moments. Waited for an apology that never came, because I think some people are constitutionally incapable of the kind of honesty an apology requires. I've made peace with that, mostly. Kayla and I talk every week now, not out of obligation the way I used to talk to our mother, counting down the minutes until I could hang up and breathe. We talk because we want to. She moved into an apartment near mine last spring, and some Sundays, she comes over and I teach her the things Grandma Rose taught me. How to feel when the dough is ready, how to tell if yeast is still alive, how to sit with your own thoughts instead of running from them. She's not very good at baking yet. She burned an entire batch of dinner rolls the first time, and we laughed about it until we both cried a little, for reasons that had nothing to do with the bread. I moved into Grandma Rose's house that autumn. I couldn't sell it. I knew that the moment the papers were finalized. I walked through those rooms and felt her everywhere. In the kitchen where she taught me to bake, on the porch swing where she told me I was loved and someone had simply forgotten to tell me, in the garden that I've since brought back to life, tomatoes and rosemary filling the summer air the way they always had. I planted something new last spring, too. A small rose bush, right by the porch steps, where I can see it every morning when I have my coffee. I think about that day in the lawyer's office sometimes, the gray dress, the smile on my mother's face when she told me I was never the favorite. I understand now that she was wrong, not because I was secretly the favorite all along, but because favoritism was never the right lens for what my grandmother gave me. She didn't love me more than Kayla. She loved me completely, the way you love someone you see clearly, flaws and all, and she made sure that love outlasted her, hidden in an envelope in a recipe tin, waiting for exactly the right moment to find me. I used to believe you had to earn a place in your own family. I don't believe that anymore. I believe now that the people who really love you don't make you audition for it. They just show up, Sunday after Sunday, porch swing after porch swing, and they tell you, as many times as it takes, until you finally believe it. You are not responsible. You are loved. Someone finally told me, and this time I let myself hear it.